Steenburg, and I am co-chair of Thursday for the Wellness and Wellbeing Week in the Law Conference. We are focusing on diversity and well-being, and today we have three special guests to kind of talk about the cost of assimilation. That is sort of our context. And so let's first have our guests introduce themselves, and then we'll launch into the questions. Debbie?
Sounds good. Hi, everybody. My name is Debbie Tang. I am a partner at Bridge Partners. Bridge Partners is a Black-owned executive search firm that focuses on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I practiced for many years, both in big law and also in-house at Marriott.
Thanks, Debbie. Hi, everyone. My name is Ru Bhat. I am a partner at Major Lindsay in Africa. I work with Sarah. I am a queer Indian American man, and I am the co-founder of our MLA's Asian Affinity Group, ML Asians. I'm also a co-founder of our LGBT group, The Outlaws, and I also sit on the board for Act to Change, an AAPI focused anti-bullying organization. So we've been doing a lot of work recently online, and that has been an interesting but very rewarding experience. In my free time, I'm also a DJ in New York City, known in the queer community as part of a collective called Occupy the Disco.
Awesome. Kate?
Hi, my name is Katharine Manning. I am the president of Blackbird DC and the author of the recently released The Empathetic Workplace, 5 Steps to a Compassionate, Calm, and Confident Response to Trauma on the Job. I'm also a lawyer. I was with the Justice Department for about 15 years, and before that with a big firm in San Francisco. And also relevant to this discussion, I am a white woman and also a lesbian. My wife and I have been together now for exactly half of my life, and we have 3 kids. And I'm really looking forward to being able to talk about these issues with all of you.
Welcome, you guys. And I did not self-identify. I am a Black, biracial, and cisgender, and I'm so excited that you guys are here. So let's go ahead and get started. So the cost of assimilation is what we're calling this segment. And I'm curious to hear from each one of you what that phrase, what does that mean to you?
For me, when I was coming up in law firms, one of the first things that I think about when I think of assimilation was I was 23 years old. I was straight out of law school. I had gone straight through from undergrad, and I looked young, I felt young, and I changed my name, right? So I went by Deborah because I thought that it would make people take me more seriously. Since I already looked young, I thought Debbie was just too, silly of a name to have at a big fancy law firm. And it didn't stick. It didn't work because as I started becoming friends with other associates and partners, they would just call me Debbie. And I was like, all right, the jig is up, right? But, it's something simple like that where you're trying to do your best to fit in, and, the people that you're working with seem to be very different than you. And all you're trying to do is just trying to be as much like them as possible.
Thanks for sharing that, Debbie. I actually changed my name too, but I think my full name is Ruthvidge, but I grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania, and after 18 years of people unable to say my name, I kind of when I went to college, I had just come out to myself as well, and my best friends were already calling me Ru, and it was funny because Ru was the person I always wanted to be growing up, where, I was closeted and that sort of thing. So it's just interesting. I had a name that makes such a big impact. I think the cost of assimilation for me, though, was, I was fresh out of law school and I decided to go into recruiting, basically. And here I was in this completely corporate environment. And I've always been a loud, colorful guy, as Debbie and Sarah can attest to. I've always sort of just marched to my own drum and spoke my mind and that sort of thing. And I think a lot of that had to do with me accepting myself early on when I was 18 and figuring out my life as a young, queer Indian American, because at that time I didn't know any other Indian anyone in the Indian community that was gay, and so it was sort of it was a survival thing that I needed to figure out for myself. And when I went into this corporate law firm environment, the recruiting environment, all with former lawyers that were there that kind of treated it as a law firm, I also felt like I had to shelter that so much in those early years. But now I'm a partner at the firm, and I'm realizing that all of my success comes from me being authentically me. My candidates, my clients, all of them respect me and understand me that I'm a multifaceted person that does a lot of things, you know what I mean? And sheltering who I am means I'm unhappy and then I won't be successful. So I think there was just so many ways where I tried to assimilate. And as the years have gone on, it's been 13 years now, I'm realizing that I broke every single one of those shackles, because that's what ultimately led to my success.
Thank you both. Those are just such really wonderful insights and stories to share. So thank you so much for sharing those, both of you. When I think about the cost of assimilation as a lesbian, to me, that really means coming out versus being closeted. And, I came out in the early 90s. I was at Smith College at the time, which was a very welcoming environment, but I was very early on schooled in the ACT UP movement and the AIDS epidemic rhetoric around your silence will not protect you. And at the time, there was a big movement to encourage people to come out of the closet, because the belief was, which I think was correct, that people were harboring negative stereotypes about gays and lesbians because they thought they didn't know any. And when people realized, oh, in fact, my coworker, my neighbor, my kid's teacher is gay, that made it, sometimes obviously there were horrible prices to pay for that, but often people would realize, oh, I actually already do know somebody who's gay, and it's fine. And it's actually, I already like that person. So that's good. That was really the power of Ellen coming out, right? And Will and Grace and some of those early shows. So, and this kind of goes to one of my core beliefs, which is around the power of empathy, that we, in general, I think bigotry cannot survive proximity, that when you work closely with somebody, when you know somebody, it's very, very hard to engage in stereotypes or hate them on the basis of some sort of immutable characteristic once you actually get to know people. And so that's part of why I think it's so important to come out. In terms of the costs of being closeted, I think it creates, as Ru was just saying, this loss of self, it's a squelching of our creativity. There's a lot of mental energy that goes into being closeted. I've often thought that there should be a reverse version of National Coming Out Day, where all of the straight people try to be closeted all day, they take off their wedding bands and they hide their, pictures of their spouses, and they try to skate around what they did over the weekend. It requires a whole lot of mental energy. And when we're engaged in that, we're not being authentic. We aren't being our full selves at work because of all of those kind of machinations that we're making. And it creates distance between us and others. If I can't be authentic and share with you something really, really important, my spouse, who I've been with for half of my life, if I can't share that with you, how close are we ever actually going to be? And I think that is clear, certainly to me, but probably also to you, even if you don't know what it is, you can sense that guardedness, and it will stymie the relationship. So I think there are tremendous costs to staying closeted. In terms of the costs of being out, I was thinking back, I've been out my whole career, right? It was something I felt very strongly about, and from interviews immediately. I mean, Sarah knows, at law school, day one, I looked for opportunities to come out to people. And then in interviews, I would always make an effort to come out, because I wanted to make sure. People often don't read me as lesbian. So I always make the point of dropping it in pretty early, because I didn't want to go any place where that was not going to be okay. But I have had moments in my career, and one in particular I think about where it was when I was at the Justice Department and I was working for a very conservative administration. And in particular, there was one woman who was a very, very religious conservative woman. And I knew that it was not going to be okay with her that I was a lesbian. She was not my direct supervisor. She was my boss's boss, but I worked with her a fair amount. And I spent a lot of time doing that little dance of like, what I did this weekend and trying to skate around, my wife, Susan, and all of that stuff. But I had this moment, at the time when I was working pretty closely with this woman, my wife was pregnant and I was about to go out on maternity leave and I was not pregnant. And so I knew that there could come this moment where I was going to have to decide, am I going to just flat lie to her? Or am I going to come out? And fortunately, it didn't happen. I mean, it sort of she ended up leaving for other reasons that became part of the national discourse. But she ended up leaving and I didn't have to have that moment. But it was something that I confronted because I had made a vow to myself early on that I was never going to lie. And there was a real chance that I would be fired by her and there would have been no employment protections for me. And it was really not until last year in the Bostock opinion from the Supreme Court that there were employment protections federally for federal employees for sexual orientation and transgender status. So it was clear to me that I could have been fired in that moment. And fortunately, it didn't happen. But I also, I was sort of confronting that fact that maybe that's worth it, because if I've made this commitment to living my truth, then that's what I need to do.
I mean, it sounds to me as though all three of you at different points in your career, pretty early on in your careers, found a way to kind of show up and be your authentic self. When I think of assimilation, I think of kind of external demands, some external kind of force, especially when we think about law and the practice of law and the picture of the practice of law that we all see all the time. And we're kind of fall outside of that picture. So I'm so curious, as you were kind of going through that process of figuring out who you were and showing up authentically within your professions, how did the cost of that, how did that sort of start to show up or manifest for you?
Yeah, so I think that for me, when I was working in big law firms, I happened to be, I guess this was the early 2000s, the firms that I was at, there were no Asian American partners, whether it was male or female. And it was very hard for me to see myself succeeding in those types of environments where, if you can't see it, you can't be it, right? Because when I saw the other partners, they didn't look like me. The things they did on the weekends didn't sound like things that I would be doing. It was very country club and that kind of thing. And as a young professional, I just remember thinking, that's not what I'm aspiring to. And I think that when I made the move to go in-house and I was in a larger corporate environment and it was a little bit more diverse, I worked at Marriott, and Marriott as a hotel company, it's naturally very international. And, the projects that I was working on were, in Latin America and the Caribbean. And I just felt much more comfortable after leaving sort of the confines of big law. And at Marriott, it felt like being an Asian American, being Chinese American could actually be a plus and not a minus, right? In terms of they have hotels in Asia and they have a legal department in Asia, and maybe I could be an asset over there. And so for me, that felt much more natural and it felt much more a place where I could be myself.
That's interesting, Debbie. I think for me, when I was in law school, you've all seen Legally Blonde. I was legally queer. I was that activist. I was doing all this stuff. I was dressing up in like outlandish outfits just because I was like, what am I doing this completely conservative place, right? There weren't a lot of Indians at my school, and there weren't, there was a queer group there, but it was mostly white queer people, right? And so like it was just kind of like I always felt like an outsider. And then I went on OCI interviews, and I remember this partner looked at me. I had worked at a fashion company in-house that summer. And before that, I was an actor and a dancer before I went to law school. So I had worked at some fashion boutiques in New York. And the partner just looked at me and he said, okay, your interests are Bollywood, music, and fashion, and you work at a company where I can't afford anything. Why do you think you would be a good fit for my firm? And it was clearly like dripping with homophobia, that entire question. And honestly, like at that point, I was like, I had gone on so many of these OCI interviews, and it was like square peg, round hole. It just felt like I was trying to be this person that I wasn't, you know? And I remember looking that man in the face and I just said, well, if you can't afford anything at Burberry or Coach, then maybe I don't want to work here either. And I walked out of the interview. I was just I was really like, I had it, you know what I mean? And at the same time, my boyfriend worked at a big firm and he was Indian American. And he was telling me all these stories about how he couldn't really fit in, right? As a queer person at these firms, and how he was like, I'm thinking about taking up smoking so that way at least I have an activity to do with my partners and maybe connect with them that way. I'm like, you're seriously going to consider killing yourself, you know what I mean, in order to do this? No offense to smokers, but it just was something like, it just made no sense to me. And then finally, I was like trying to figure out, like, why am I trying to go down this path that clearly is like, life is telling me something that you shouldn't be doing this. And then at the same time, you know, I realized I'm a people person in a paper world, and going into the world of recruiting made a little bit more sense because I love connecting with people and connecting, you know, face to face. And I work at Major Lindsay in Africa. Bob Major is gay, so the name partner of the firm. And so I didn't know that until right before I got an offer that was true. And that just totally cemented. I was like, maybe this is a place where I can be myself. You know what I mean? I still shackled myself in a little bit in the beginning, right? But as I continued to get more successful, I let those shackles go. You know what I mean? I was like, I'm going to be my full self. And I've said this point before, but I do think everything happens for a reason. And, you know, I went on like 14 interviews and they all just like, I wasn't a cultural fit for them, and that's fine. You know, back then. Hopefully things are better for everyone else these days. But it truly was an interesting experience.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't have that experience, and maybe it's because I'm a white woman. It's probably a different perspective, but I definitely had friends in law school who had similar experiences, either as summer associates or through interviewing. But that kind of blatant homophobia just is like jaw-dropping to me. It's incredible. You know, so my first job was out of law school was at a big firm in San Francisco. There were a lot of openly gay lawyers there, and I didn't worry about being out there. It was sort of welcomed, and a lot of people already knew my wife because she was a couple of years ahead of me and was also a lawyer at a big firm in San Francisco. So that all felt very comfortable. And then I got to DOJ, you know, a few years later, and I again came in like, this is who I am, and I'm going to be completely out. And I remember being sort of stunned that was not like the norm around there. And in fact, I was maybe a month in, and there was a party at somebody's house. Like, she had invited people over to her house for a get together of some sort. And I saw on her bookshelf a picture of her with another woman. And I was like, So I sort of took her aside, and she was like, well, yeah, but nobody knows. And I'm like, but her picture's right here. She's like, nobody knows. Shh. I was like, was I not supposed to say anything? I didn't know this was supposed to be a secret, you know? And, you know, it probably has had impact on me, you know, I mean, in terms of my career, in terms of my, you know, friend circles and people that interacted with me in law school. But I sort of always came in with this feeling of, I need to be fully authentically myself. I have to be out, in part because it's important to me, and also because I have a lot of privilege. as a lesbian that a lot of people don't. I mean, number one, I'm cis, so that, you know, gives me some extra credibility that or legitimacy that other people seem to lack, you know. And then also because I am white, because I am educated, I'm a lawyer, I have, you know, all different kinds of privilege. You know, I remember one of the hardest talks I ever gave when I was at DOJ was I went to speak to the state sheriff's association at a large, you know, in a southern state. Okay, so the picture like 200 giant men who were all just, you know, looking at me like this, right? And I was like, oh boy, oh boy, this is, here we go. And what I was there to talk to them about was, you know, my work is with crime victims, right? So I was there to talk to them about the experience of, you know, how to support victims in their cases. And I decided, you know what, I'm gonna talk about my own experience of being a victim. And it was an experience that I recounted was about our next door neighbor when we lived on Capitol Hill, who started screaming at my wife and our very young child because he thought that our toddler had drawn with chalk in front of his house. So he started screaming at them. They came into the house, and then he took the chalk and wrote really large homophobic slur in front of our house. Kept shouting, and, you know, eventually got in a fist fight with a neighbor. And, you know, it was obviously very scary, very upsetting. We called the police. The police were amazing. DC police were just fantastic. They came right away. They took him in. They ended up releasing him. But before they did, they called us to let us know that he was going to be home. They told us, you know, where to call if we had any problems. And I felt so supported in that moment. And I was there now talking to this group of sheriffs about civil rights cases in the South. And so I felt like it was really important to share that story and how meaningful it was to me, even though they weren't able to charge him and, you know, nothing sort of came of it from the criminal justice system. The fact that they treated me with such respect was so meaningful to me. And my friend, who is a Black woman, a straight Black woman, was like, oh no, you can't tell them that. And I was like, what do you mean? And she was like, they will like chase you down. They will run you out of town. And I was like, well, okay. But like, first of all, I have the privilege of being white, like, and not necessarily appearing queer. Like, so I get to decide whether to come out on that. That's a privilege a lot of people don't have, right? You know, to be able to decide whether to reveal their minority status, but also there are going to be a lot of people in that audience who are queer, who have to stay there, you know, who don't have the opportunity to just share this story and get on a plane and fly back to DC. And so I felt like it was really important that I do it. And I still am like, oh man, that was a really uncomfortable conversation. And there were a lot of like just steely looks in the audience, but I also am glad that I did it because who knows, right? Who knows who it helps when you share your experience in that way.
I mean, it sounds to me like, thank you all for sharing these experiences and thoughts, but it sounds to me like a big part of your well-being and being able to really be authentic and find that center and that groundedness comes from some deep thought and kind of bringing yourself and just being yourself, right? And as opposed to trying to fit yourself within a box. You know, we're always trying to talk about the cross section between diversity and well-being, and it seems to me that the best way to do it, or the way that all three of you have found those ways, your journeys were journeys of self, right? And showing up for yourself. And however you were, finding environments and corporate cultures that were more inviting and where you could be all pieces of yourself as opposed to leaving pieces behind or wearing a lot of masks. So any last thoughts before we finish up this recording?
So one thing that I'll say is, as you were talking about that actually made me think about my fellow associates from when I was in big law. And a lot of them I'm still friends with to this day. And a lot of them are actually also women of color. And I think that it was their support and the community and the unity that even if there weren't a lot of people in leadership that looked like us, we had each other. And I think that in terms of wellness, one of the things that's important to do, yes, we all hear about self-care, but it's also about, you know, helping those around you, helping each other, supporting each other. And I think it really is the best way to sort of get through these types of situations sometimes where you feel a little bit at a loss, and definitely in the minority in more ways than one.
Thanks, Debbie. Yeah, I think I agree. I think that the importance of community wherever you can find it, it's essential. You know, I come from a very conservative, or at least at that time, my family was very conservative. And I went to college and with the thought, like, if anyone finds out that I'm gay, I'm going to be disowned in my family. So, you know, so I was kind of out at school, but I went far enough away that I wasn't, and I always knew that I had to figure out my own path. But I also knew that I needed to find my community ASAP, because if for some reason, the family thing doesn't work out, there was a survival instinct, then I will have another community to look on. And so people always kind of come to me now and they're like, Ru, you know so many people and you have so many strong, deep relationships, outside of family. And it's true, I don't have a partner, I don't have kids, I don't, or anything like that. But it's really important for me to forge those relationships with the people around me. And they're almost always some sort of, someone from some sort of marginalized community, because you can find, common ground and common connections. And I do believe it's my purpose where I am today as a partner at a firm and sitting on these organizations, all that sort of stuff, to really stand up for the other Rus that are right behind me. You know what I mean? And so like, it's really, my therapist was like, you just care a lot. And I was like, yeah, I guess I do. But I think that's really important, right? So like, you got to show up for yourself first. It's really important. But part of showing up for yourself is showing up for others as well, and being that person and giving them that support. So I truly, truly think that's really important.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I feel like that sort of dovetails with what I wanted to say, because I do believe it's so important. And I think that is what has helped me so much over the years, is my community. And that's been amazing. I also think it's important that we support each other within the community, but also look for opportunities to support each other even outside of the community, right? So if you are somebody who, in your workplace, have the opportunity to make it a little easier on others who are maybe of a minority status different from your own, look for those opportunities to do what you can to support people. It can be really, really hard and draining and exhausting to be a minority. And so if you have an opportunity to just, have a nice conversation or check in, make sure that you're mentioning things like the hate crimes in Atlanta a couple of weeks ago. I think it's really, really important that we acknowledge that those things are happening. We don't just kind of walk past them and pretend they're not happening, or, this is kind of too upsetting, or we don't have a place to talk about it here. Like, it's important to acknowledge that, because if we don't say anything, people assume that we don't care, and so we have to talk about it, to let people know that we do care. It matters to us, and thereby they matter to us, and their experiences matter to us.
You guys, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today about your experiences and your thoughts about assimilation and how to find your way through as lawyers, as former practicing lawyers.